First time, Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston are getting in some time together on the court for the Indiana Fever.
Obviously, there are 4 core players with the Indiana Fever: Caitlin Clark, Aliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and Lexi Hall. We know that Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston will be returning to the Fever, but what about the third component of their big three? What about Kelsey Mitchell?
The Indiana Fever have just dropped a massive free agency bombshell that is shaking the entire WNBA. New signings are officially joining Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston, and this is a full-scale power move with championship pressure written all over it. The message is loud, brutal, and clear. Indiana isn't rebuilding anymore. They're coming for everything.
What is this Fever team going to look like? Who are they going to be able to bring back?
This wasn't normal free agency. The Indiana Fever moved like a team that already knew exactly what needed to change, and they did it fast. Within hours of signings opening, 4 key moves were already in motion, each one tied to a specific weakness from last season. It felt planned, sharp, and directly connected to one goal: turning this roster into a championship contender right now.
We know that Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston will be returning to the Fever, but what about the third component of their big three? What about Kelsey Mitchell? Caitlin Clark was on NBA on NBC once again as an NBA analyst, and she dropped a huge bomb for Fever fans.
Everything starts with Caitlin Clark. She publicly said the Fever should be the favorites to win the championship. That matters because it changes the pressure around the entire franchise. Every roster decision now gets judged against that statement. It also puts real pressure on the front office group of Kelly Krauskopf, Amber Cox, and Stephanie White. They are no longer building a long-term project. They are responding to a win-now demand from their franchise player, and there is no space to delay or experiment.
Winning franchises do whatever it takes. You think a team like New York, with all of the connections they have, with all the sponsorship deals they have, you think they're not going to do whatever it takes to bring in the players they want?
That is why the Fever went into free agency with 4 clear non-negotiables. First, they had to keep the Clark-Mitchell backcourt together. Kelsey Mitchell was coming off an all-WNBA first-team season and top 5 MVP voting, so letting her walk was not an option. She was re-signed on a 1-year, $1.4 million Supermax deal, the first in franchise history. That move alone protected Indiana's entire offensive structure because without Mitchell, defenses could load up on Clark every possession. Second, they needed size in the front court. Last season, Indiana struggled when opponents got physical in the paint. Teams slowed them down simply by controlling rebounds and bodying them inside. That weakness had to be fixed if they wanted to compete in playoff basketball, where physicality increases every round.
That the Indiana Fever's first priority is signing back Kelsey Mitchell. Now, the reason there's been speculation as to if Kelsey Mitchell will return to the Fever or not is because of the new CBA and how the new salary structure is.
Third, they needed wings who can both score and defend. In 2025, Indiana's wings were inconsistent, and that showed up in the playoffs. Opponents attacked those spots, forced rotations, and broke down the defensive structure. The new plan required players who could stay on the floor in high-pressure moments without becoming liabilities on either end.
And she was a plus 35 on the court. I believe she only missed 1 shot the entire game, and she also played wildly unselfish.
Fourth, they needed a real backup guard. When Clark sat, the offense lost control. Possessions slowed, decision-making became inconsistent, and the entire system lost rhythm. That cannot exist on a championship team. The goal was to find someone who could actually run the offense, not just survive minutes until the starters returned.
And I say that because the WNBA is at such a this is such a transformational time in the WNBA. And I do think that it's time for these front offices to start acting like professional sports organizations.
The urgency behind these moves becomes clearer when you look at the roster situation. Indiana only had 3 players under contract: Clark, Aliyah Boston, and a depth piece. That meant nearly the entire roster had to be rebuilt from scratch under pressure. On top of that, the cap situation was tight, with roughly $7 million total space and about $3.1 million already committed to the core group. That left limited room for error and forced every signing to be intentional. Despite that pressure, the Fever still moved aggressively in free agency. They did not just fill spots. They attacked specific weaknesses and matched each one to a targeted solution. That is why the early moves felt so significant. It was not about collecting talent, it was about correcting structural flaws that were exposed under playoff-level pressure.
First time that Caitlin Clark ever started for Team USA, which if you watch my last episode, you know how I feel about that. I do think it's kind of crazy that it took 4 games to start her. And the only 2 players who hadn't started up until then was Caitlin Clark and Rae Burrell, and Rae Burrell was a last-minute addition to this team.
The bigger shift is what this says about Indiana's direction. This is no longer a rebuilding team asking for patience. This is a roster being built around urgency, expectations, and direct demands from its franchise player. And with multiple free agents already showing interest in joining, the perception around the Fever has clearly changed. They are no longer trying to convince players to come. Players are now considering Indiana as a real destination.
Like, start putting faces to these dollar amounts, to these tags as their number 1 option. So if the Indiana Fever doesn't value Kelsey Mitchell beyond 1 year, they need to make that clear now.
Even after solving 4 major roster problems early in free agency, the message from the front office is clear. The roster is not finished, and the standard has already been set at championship level.
But Damiris Dantas is set to sign with the Indiana Fever. One thing I will also point out, you guys, is fans noticed that the 2026 team roster on the Indiana Fever's website, it originally only had Caitlin Clark, Aliyah Boston, Michaela Timpson, and Kelsey Mitchell. No, excuse me. Kelsey Mitchell was not there. However, now she is there. And again, I do not know the timeline between this, but I saw multiple fans pointing out, like, Kelsey Mitchell used to not be on the website for the Indiana Fever, but now she is on that website.
The Indiana Fever just made a surprise signing. YouTube. The first move that just had to happen was Kelsey Mitchell. And honestly, there was no drama here, no hesitation, no, we'll think about it. This was automatic. A $1.4 million Supermax deal, the first in franchise history, and it basically tells you everything about where Indiana is mentally right now.
The defense switches up, the pace of the game switches up. Obviously, we've seen it in multiple games. The minute Caitlin Clark comes on the floor, the team drops back into like a box and one situation or a zone situation because it's so hard to play man up on someone like Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark is at a 15.5 efficiency. She is leading Team USA. Ryan Howard is second, Paige Beckers is third. Caitlin Clark is also leading in points per game at 12.8.
But the real story isn't just the money. It's the journey behind it. This is a player who stayed when things were rough. Not rough in a polite way either. We're talking about seasons where the wins barely reached double digits, where the roster kept shifting, and where most players would have quietly started looking for exits. Mitchell didn't. She stayed, carried the load, and now she gets rewarded right when the team is finally turning the corner.
It's not going to be great basketball games, not going to be super competitive, but Caitlin Clark looked like the best player on the floor today. And it honestly looked like she wasn't even playing at 100%.
And the basketball side of it is even more important. When Mitchell is on the floor with Caitlin Clark, defenses can't just collapse into the paint anymore. If they load up on Clark, Mitchell burns them from the outside. If they step out on Mitchell, Clark turns the lane into a highway. It's basically pick your poison, and for the first time, Indiana actually has both options on the table at the same time.
You know, it's a very unique situation. I think there's over 100 players in the league that are free agents, so we really only know about 5 people or 3 people that are going to be on our team next year, but I feel like we have a great core. You know, our first priority is to sign Kelsey Mitchell back. Was first team All-WNBA last year. Kind of my running mate in the backcourt. She makes it really easy for me, so, you know, there's nothing like playing for the Fever. I think we're going to be the favorite to win it all.
There's also a quiet detail here that people don't talk about enough. The core designation locked Mitchell in before she could even test the market. That means Indiana didn't just keep her, they controlled the entire situation. And the one-year structure, that's not random either. That's cap strategy. It keeps flexibility open for future extensions around Clark and Aliyah Boston without trapping the franchise financially. So yes, it's a reward deal, but it's also a chess move.
Monique Billings is leading in blocks per game at 2 blocks per game. And Monique Billings is somebody who has surprised me this tournament because she was a late minute addition to this Team USA team when it was announced that Sonia Citron and Aliyah Boston wouldn't be participating due to injury. But Monique Billings has come out with so much energy. She's doing all the dirty work on the court. She runs the floor really well. She's also been one to run that high screen and roll with Caitlin at the point, and she rolls really well. She has really good hands. So
now from there, things got even more interesting. Because then came Monique Billings, and this is where Indiana started feeling less like a rebuilding team and more like a team stealing players from contenders.
Winning franchises do whatever it takes. You think a team like New York, with all of the connections they have, with all of the sponsorship deals they have, you think they're not going to do whatever it takes to bring in the players they want?
Billings wasn't sitting there waiting for Indiana. She had interest from multiple places. The New York Liberty were involved. The new Golden State Valkyries were in the mix too. So this wasn't an easy pickup. This was Indiana going into a crowded room and walking out with the player anyway. That matters, because it says something about how the league is starting to view this team.
Caitlin Clark has the highest plus minus of anyone on Team USA at 104. And when you talk about Caitlin Clark and what kind of value she adds to the floor, that's just it. It doesn't even matter if Caitlin Clark is having a 30-point game or a 10-point game. When she is on the court, it changes the entire energy.
And the fit is almost unfair. Billings runs the floor at the exact pace Clark wants to play. No hesitation, no slow jogging into sets, just full-speed transition basketball. On top of that, she spaces the floor and defends without turning every possession into a foul situation, which was a real issue for Indiana last season. But the chemistry part is what really makes this click. She already played with Clark in a Team USA setting, so there's no adjustment period needed. That connection is already there. She also has familiarity with Mitchell from prior play environments, which basically turns her into a plug-and-play piece from day one.
However, I think they should have started her. I think they should have started her just simply because FIBA was also promoting her so much. Like, clearly, she's the best point guard on this team. Clearly, she's the best guard on this team. It looks like she's the overall best player on this team.
And this is why people keep circling back to one idea. They didn't just sign a player, they signed a system fit.
And this is when we talk about the split, you guys, and why it's very hard for players to get more of a revenue share than what they're asking for. 42% of the WNBA is owned by the WNBA, 42% is owned by the NBA, and 16% is owned by this investor group. Now, looking back at it, you guys, the WNBA was not doing well in 2022. So like, this might not have been a bad decision. This might have been a decision that they felt like they needed to make in order to continue the league.
Then you get to the biggest headache from last season, and Indiana actually solved it early. The backup guard problem. Because last year, when Clark sat, things got messy fast. The offense slowed down, possessions turned stagnant, and the whole system lost its identity. It wasn't just a drop in production, it was a full identity shift every time she went to the bench. Enter Tiasha Harris.
I guess the players were pushing Kathy Engelbert to allow them to display their activism in the bubble.
She shoots around 40% from 3, which already changes spacing immediately. But the bigger thing is control. She can actually run an offense without everything falling apart. So now the bench isn't just surviving minutes, it's actually functional. That alone changes how a playoff series looks.
So Damiris Dantas is to sign with the Indiana Fever. And now this is the first confirmed signing that we have for the Indiana Fever. It's pretty clear that Aliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark will be back. It's pretty clear that the Indiana Fever are still going after Kelsey Mitchell. Will she be back? We are not sure.
And then there's the kind of signing that doesn't get loud headlines, but quietly matters a lot over a long season. Damiris Dantas. This is a veteran minimum deal, and at first glance, it doesn't look flashy. But that's kind of the point. This is not about highlights. This is about structure. Dantas brings spacing from the big position, which matters more than people think when you're playing next to Clark and Boston. She also brings experience, and more importantly, calm. Locker room presence, game understanding, and the kind of stability that doesn't show up in stats, but absolutely shows up in tight games.
Caitlin Clark is leading in some of the biggest stat categories, and then you also have Angel Reese and Paige Beckers, who are two of the other young stars in the WNBA, also leading in these stat categories. So if you want to look forward to the future of the WNBA, the future of Team USA, you have the three players right here. And that is something that is just so exciting for this league. Obviously, Caitlin Clark came into the league, immediately became the face of the league, but then the following year you have Paige Beckers coming in, who I would argue is already one of the top guards in the WNBA, and then you have someone like Angel Reese, who is absolutely unstoppable on the boards. Like, there's nobody better than her on the boards in the W.
Teams don't win championships only with stars. They win them with players like this. The ones who don't get talked about much in April, but are still on the floor in June when games slow down, pressure rises, and every possession starts to feel heavy. This is exactly that kind of addition.
I want to see that sort of dedication from a lot of these franchises to make sure that they are just making it very clear. And a lot of times you make it very clear with the amount of money that you put on the table.
And when you stack all of this together, the picture starts getting clearer. The Fever aren't just collecting talent. They're building layers: star power, shooting, pace, control, depth, and experience. All stacked in a way that actually makes sense.
Like, the buzz around these young players is so high.
And somehow, the most interesting part is still that they're not even finished yet. Something has quietly shifted around Indiana, and it's honestly the part nobody expected to happen this fast.
Because when Caitlin Clark was there, they were always ranked. They were always a top 5 team. So this is an unranked Iowa team beating one of the best teams in the country.
There are now more than 15 free agents showing real interest in the Fever, not Indiana chasing players calling Indiana. That alone is already a different world compared to where this franchise was not long ago. And the reason is pretty simple when you break it down.
And I didn't call anything last year, but I was high on the Fever last season making a deep run, and they almost proved me right. So there's nothing that the Fever have done to make me think counter to that.
First, there's the pull of Caitlin Clark. She changes how teams see Indiana instantly, and then you add something people overlook: the facility. A nearly $78 million setup that signals something very clear. Indiana isn't trying to be average. They're building like a top destination. That combination flips everything. And compared to other franchises still trying to sell the idea of being a destination, Indiana is actually proving it on the floor and in the market. So naturally, the next question becomes simple: who actually fits this kind of situation? And suddenly, the names are not small.
I also saw that Azurá Stevens reposted herself in an Indiana Fever jersey. So I do actually think that there's a lot of players in the league who would be open to going to the Indiana Fever.
Azurá Stevens is one of them. A 6'6" forward who stretches the floor and protects the rim. That combination alone makes life easier for Aliyah Boston because she doesn't have to carry every defensive matchup alone anymore. And Stevens has already hinted interest in Indiana in her own way. Nothing loud, but enough for people to notice.
And so I just think when you can get players who are versatile on not only the offensive end, but the defensive end, that's where you win your championships. That's where you make a statement.
Then you've got Alana Smith. This is the kind of player who doesn't always show up in headlines, but changes how defenses behave. She can space the floor, defend multiple positions, and most importantly, punish teams that try to overload on Clark. If defenses send extra help, Smith makes them pay immediately. Now add veteran presence, and things get even more serious. Nneka Ogwumike brings championship DNA, not theory, actual experience. She stabilizes a locker room and understands playoff pressure in a way younger teams simply don't have yet. That matters when games slow down and everything becomes mental.
A capital raise featuring new investors and existing WNBA and NBA owners brought in $75 million that was used to supercharge the WNBA's business growth, including better marketing and more innovation.
Then there are the high-end two-way wings like Satu Sabali and Gabby Williams. These are the types of players who swing playoff series. Not just because they score, but because they defend, switch, and take away the opponent's best option. In tight games, that changes everything. But what makes this group interesting is not just talent, it's impact. And that brings you to the role players, the ones nobody talks about until it's too late.
That was like, why would I not? Why not be a part of something great? You go from Diana and now you're going to a team who is going to be a contender for a championship. And so I'm stoked about this year. I'm really excited for the players, but I'm also excited just for the community and the relationship and the culture that you guys have here.
Lexi Hull is one of them. Improved shooting, strong defense, and reliability in a system that needs trust more than flash. Then there's Sophie Cunningham, who brings edge, toughness, and a kind of emotional energy that completely changes how a team feels when she's on the floor. Brianna Jones does the dirty work that nobody wants but every contender needs. Screens, rebounds, physical battles in the paint. All the things that don't show up in highlight reels, but absolutely show up in playoff wins. And then Ray Burrell brings upside, the kind that can quietly turn into real production when placed in a structured system. Because here's the truth, championships aren't just built by stars. They're built by the 8th and 9th players who either hold a lead or lose it. And then you get to the wild cards, the risky ones. Kelsey Plum can solve bench scoring instantly, but brings usage questions. Odyssey Sims, Ari McDonald, Kia Nurse, each brings a different version of stability, defense, or experience. Kennedy Carter brings scoring explosion, but also real chemistry questions. And Liz Cambridge brings pure size and ceiling, but also unpredictability that can swing a roster in either direction. That's where things get tricky, because now Indiana isn't just building a roster anymore. They're managing personalities, roles, expectations, and pressure all at once. And that leads to the real chess game. The cap situation is tight, around $7 million total, with roughly $3.1 million already locked in. That means every single signing matters. Every contract affects not just this season, but the future, especially when extensions for Clark and Boston come into play later.
I like everything about this. Now you have established veteran pieces that aren't just, those bench coaches who are going to give you a couple. No, these are like tangible points, tangible box score fillers.
So the front office is in a position where they can't just spend. They have to calculate everything. No overpaying, no bad fits, no emotional decisions. Because in a setup like this, one wrong contract doesn't just hurt the season, it can close the entire window before it even fully opens. And the biggest shift is flexibility. This team can go fast and small, slow and physical, or switch into defensive lineups without losing structure. There's no single way to guard them anymore. That's why the conversation has changed so fast. 1 year ago, this was a rebuilding team asking for patience. Now it's a roster built around expectations, pressure, and a real title window. Other teams aren't ignoring it either. They're building specifically to stop Indiana now. But the question is still open. Is this a championship roster? Or is it too much talent packed together too quickly? And if it is real, then the final debate becomes simple. What's the one missing piece that turns this into a title team?